Okay, new yachtsmen, we are on a 61-foot motor yacht. We're in Florida Bay, on the way to Marathon, Florida. It's not a great day outside. The wind's blowing about 25 knots earlier today, laying down a little bit now. Right now I'm cruising at 19 knots, and I am 30 miles from Marathon, so we're not in cell phone range of anything. We're kind of in the middle of Florida Bay. I'm dodging crab pots. One right there. And today what I'd like to do is just take you through what I call standing watch. So what's it really like to be on one of these boats when you're moving it, and what are you looking at, and how to use the electronics and all that stuff. So first of all, I have an autopilot, and the autopillet, get this out of the way. The autopilot is right here, and right now it says I'm steering at 169 degrees. I'm doing 18.9 knots. My heading is 168, 169. So that is keeping me on that heading with reasonable success. It's going to fluctuate depending on wind and waves and stuff a few degrees, but it's not like you're on the highway with a car. It doesn't really matter if you're precisely on track. So we're just cruising along here, and I've got my chart plotter up, and this chart plotter is pretty typical in the industry. Right now I have it fairly far zoomed out because I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. If I were coastal cruising and there was more to worry about, more markers and shallow water and stuff, I'd be zoomed in much more closely. And this works kind of like your phone. So you can go in here. This pink line is the heading that I want to be on. That's one of the markers I'm headed for. Actually, it's not quite right. So I'm going to head for here. And I'm going to say nav to go to. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say nav. And it's going to take me right on that line. So right now it's telling me that I'm 27.7 nautical miles away. I'm going to get there at 4:30 p.m. I am 94 feet off course, and my bearing is 162. And my heading is 153. Like I said, both of those will not always agree. I've got my speed right here. You can see that speed is changing as I go up and down the waves. I've got my depth displayed here. You can configure all this. My water temperature is 55 degrees, and my GPS position. GPS position is one of those things that's up there really for an emergency. You don't really care what your GPS position is if you're looking at where you are on the chart. However, should you have an emergency or something, you would tell the Coast Guard that I am currently right here and I need help. On the other screen right now, I have the engine room display camera. So I have a lot of choices here. I'm not really worried about radar and other displays at the moment. It's beautiful visibility. There's no other boats out here. So the engine room is the most valuable thing to me. But I could very quickly change that. If I wanted to go in here, I could say, well, I'd rather see the radar, and I'm offshore, and let's zoom out so you get a better feel for it. Now just a little more here. So the shoreline is way over here. Each ring is 4 miles, so 4, 8, 12, so 14 miles away I have land, and I have something up ahead. I think it's my marker actually, 4, 8, almost 12 miles away. I've got a big target up there. So that's how the radar works. It doesn't look like much in the middle of nowhere, but if it were nighttime and I was looking for other boats, this would be the most important thing. Right now it's not the most important thing. The engine room camera is to me. Now, if I were inshore and looking for shallow water, I would hit sonar and I would hit full screen and I would see the bottom. So right there you can see that's what the bottom looks like. Now I'm going up and down in the waves. So the bottom looks more irregular than it is. When I'm seeing this line go up and down, that's not necessarily the bottom, that's me. So my relationship to the bottom is changing because of the waves. These little things could be plants or coral, or these little things above are fish. That's bait fish right there. It shows me my depth. And this is time. So this is right now. And this is 5 seconds ago, and that's 10 seconds ago. And this is a minute and a half ago, or whatever that time interval is. So this is what's happening now. And then that's what I went over behind me. So it's a very, very useful tool. Kind of see what's going on. It definitely doesn't look like much when it's a perfectly flat bottom, but if it were 100 feet deep and getting shallow fast, I would really notice it. So it's a very valuable thing. Now you can see here we're displaying our temperature. That's just my battery voltage, kind of a handy thing to know in case you're having a battery charging problem. Again, I've got my speed, my heading, my bearing, how far off course I am right now. And some other things I can do here is I can do combinations. So I could choose to put multiple things on one screen. And sometimes this is valuable depending on what's going on. So right here I can see the radar in front of me, which is all that really matters, without anything overtaking me out here. I can see my depth machine, and I can see my engine room. That's a great screen too. Weather. So there are a lot of weather apps you can buy. There's not a lot turned on right here on this boat, but I could actually see radar data like you would see on the TV at home. I could see warning zones or tornado warnings and things like that on a weather forecast through satellite data. Information, I can see the tides and currents. So sometimes where I'm going, I know it's fairly shallow, and I would rather arrive at the high tide than the low tide, so I can adjust my arrival time by adjusting my speed to decide when I'm going to get there. And of course I can look at the next day and the next day and see what I need to see at the closest station or a different station. Other things in information is I have a lot of video data such as that. I can also look at the different sources. So if you have multiple cameras, you can look at multiple sources. This boat also has night vision, which I won't talk about in this video, but there are thermal solutions too to let you see better at night. So right now I think I'm going to go back to, actually I'm going to go back to radar for a while. I'm going to go to offshore. This really isn't that valuable. I don't need to see that far away. I need to see something up close. So I'm going to zoom in some more. I would typically put this on 1 or 2 miles. There's 1 mile rings. So I'm seeing stuff 4 miles away. Now you would think this wasn't valuable during the day, but actually a small boat on a rough day is kind of hard to see 2 miles out. And it'll pop right up on the screen of radar. So sometimes I've found the radar shows me another vessel long before my eyes do, unless I'm already trained in on looking for it because I've seen it on the radar. So the radars can be a really helpful tool there. So we're just cruising along here. 19 knots, really not much to do. Pretty simple about dodging crab pots. So the way they catch crabs, both down here in Florida and catch lobsters up in Maine, is they use these crab pots and they have a float on them, a rope and a float, so that they can pull them up and get the crabs or lobsters out. So you'll be going along with your autopilot on a certain heading, and driving along, and then you'll see a float. Come up on some here. So now I'm on the heading I want to be on. And straight ahead you see the little black dots. I'm not going to respond at first. I'm going to see if I'm going to naturally go by them. And I can adjust this wheel to change my heading just a little bit. And I'm headed right for that one. So I'm going to hit standby, grab my wheel, and I'm going to go to the right of this one. Stay to the right of that one. And I'm going to put myself back on the course I wanted to be on. And I'm going to hit auto. It's going to hold that course. And I'm going to keep my eyes open for the next one. So now I'm on the course I want to be on. And I'm just scanning the horizon up ahead. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 5 crab pots ahead. Only 2 of them I'm concerned about. There's a white one and a black one over there. Oh, there's one right here I just saw. Looks like we're just going to pass that one without doing anything. That's good. One crab pot there. Got 2 there. Clean the window over here. Alright, there's a white one way up there. Looks like we're going to clear that one. Yellow one. That looks like it's okay. So right here I have a green and here I have a red, and I know my channel goes this way. Channel markers are confusing when you're first starting out. The general rule is when you're coming from the ocean and you're going up a river into shore, the rule is red, right, return, meaning when you're returning to the mainland, the red marker would be on your right and the green marker would be on your left. Now in this case, the markers I'm going towards are part of the Intercoastal Waterway. The Intercoastal Waterway was built by the Army Corps of Engineers starting in the 1920s, I think mainly through the 1950s. And it was built as a strategic thing as a reaction to submarine warfare, World War I and then World War II. A lot of ships were getting sunk off the coast, so the government of the United States decided we should build an intercoastal waterway, basically connecting anything that was natural and digging canals so that you can get from Maine all the way to Corpus Christi, Texas without going out in the ocean and getting sunk by a U-boat. That way they could move gunpowder, troops, anything they needed to move inshore without risking it getting sunk. So they had to come up with a rule, and red, right, return didn't work anymore. Because red, right, return assumes you're returning. And much of the Intercoastal Waterway is running parallel to the land. So the rule they came up with for the Intercoastal Waterway was red will always be toward the mainland, and green will always be toward the ocean. So if you're coming from Boston and you're headed toward Florida, red is going to be on your right. If you're going north, red is going to be on your left. And this is always the case in every state, in every body of water. If it's an intercoastal waterway marker, this is always true. And it can get really confusing when you're coming in a river and you intersect the intercoastal waterway. So maybe red started on your right and you're turning north and you hit the intercoastal waterway and now red's on your left. So it's important you know the difference when you're looking at these markers on the chart. Is it an intercoastal waterway mark or is it a regular mark? Now the good news is that the intercoastal waterway, they've got nice natural trails and things now on these chart plotters, so it's not like you're just looking at a paper chart back in the day. So it's really gotten pretty simple to operate the vessel and understand where you need to go, because you know exactly where you are all the time. A few things on here. This territorial sea, I believe that's 12 miles from land, so that's out of the U.S. This natural resource boundary for Florida is 9 miles out, and then there's a 3 nautical mile line too. So there's different regulations for fishing and other things, depending on how far offshore you are as to what the rules are. For example, if you want to pump out your blackwater tank, you have to be out beyond the 3 mile line. If your fishing regulations are state of Florida regulations, That is inside the 9-mile line, and then the federal regulations are further offshore. I'm looking at my engine gauges. So here's my starboard engine gauge, and that tells me that I'm doing 1972 RPM. These big diesel engines don't turn near as fast as the engines in your car or motorcycle or anything like that. So this engine only does 2,300 RPM at full throttle. So when I'm at 2,000 RPM, I'm 300 off the top. I'm a little more than that. So this is a good place for this engine to run. So right now, my coolant temperature is 185 degrees. I would be concerned if it was anywhere near 200. So I just know that these engines like to run between 180 and 190. If I start seeing 195, there's probably something wrong. And my engine load is 72%. So diesel engines like to run between 70 and 80%. You really shouldn't run above 80% for sustained periods. It's not what the engines were designed for. So when it's a high-speed cruise, I'm looking for 70, 75% to be nice to the motor. But there's a lot of data here, and after a while, you just know what good is. And what I like to do is leave them both on the same screen, and they're not going to be exactly the same, but if the oil pressure on one engine is 30 and the oil pressure on the other engine is 90, then that's something to be concerned about. If they're 10 psi different, I'm not really worried about it. It's probably just the way that engine is or the sensor is. But you can see I'm burning 35 gallons an hour on this engine, burning 37 on this one. Very common for them not to be the same. One engine transmission is actually turning the other way, so there's another gear involved. Both engines are turning the same way, but the propellers aren't. There's a stabilizer pump on this setup. There's alternators on these engines, so the load is going to be slightly different from engine to engine. My fuel temperature, my fuel pressure, I can see that these are similar between the two engines. Engine hours is how we keep track of when to do oil changes and things like that. So I don't care about this while I'm running, but typically as an owner, you will write down your engine hours at the end of each day. It's just a good log to keep. And then every time you do work on the engine, such as change the oil or replace a fan belt or something, you will write down the engine hours there. It's very analogous to keeping track of the miles on your car. There's no odometer here, so I use engine hours instead of miles in the car. What else do I have going on? So this boat has apparent wind I have set up there. So it says I'm getting 9 knots from the back, 9 knots coming from behind me, and I'm doing 19 knots. So I'm sorry, that's apparent wind coming at me. So the wind is only 12 knots now, or so 10 to 12 knots. And then I have other things I can keep track of. I have a gauge here that'll tell me my fuel and water levels while I'm sitting here at the helm, so I can check on that. This is my trim tabs. This boat happens to like some tab in these conditions in a following sea. My engine key switches. I've got my horn here. So that's it. I'm just running along here, and in a couple hours we'll be tied up at the dock, and I'll get back with you.